This past weekend, Pixar released their newest movie, Hoppers. That means Pixar now has 30 feature films. Pixar has one of the most fascinating histories in animation. Some of their movies are absolute masterpieces that changed the industry forever. Others are a little more forgettable. What makes Pixar interesting is that their highs are incredibly high, and their lower tier movies, for the most part, still have interesting ideas or technical achievements. Today, we're ranking every Pixar movie from worst to best. Now, of course, this is just my personal ranking, so if your list is completely different, that's totally fine. Pixar has a lot of beloved films, so disagreements are basically guaranteed. With that said, let's get started. Coming in at last place is Turning Red. Now, before the comment section goes crazy, let me explain why this one ended up at the bottom of my list. The topic itself is not the issue. Puberty is a real part of life, and movies aimed at younger audiences can absolutely talk about that. The problem for me is the marketing. The trailers make this movie look like a goofy story about a girl who turns into a giant red panda when she gets emotional, like a fluffy Incredible Hulk. But the trailers don't really show how heavily this movie leans into the puberty metaphor. So imagine a parent opening Disney Plus, seeing the cute panda thumbnail, and putting this on for their 6-year-old. That's where the disconnect happens. Then there's a scene that completely took me out of the movie. The twerking scene. I genuinely don't understand how that made it through every stage of production. Someone wrote it, storyboarded it, animated it, and approved it. And at no point did anyone say, maybe we shouldn't animate a teenage girl doing this. Add in a random abortion joke near the end, a main character who's really obnoxious for large parts of the movie, and a plot that's basically a ripoff of Teen Wolf, and it's a movie that just doesn't work. Now, to be fair, the animation style is expressive, and a lot of people really connected with the story, but personally, this one just did not land. Number 29, Cars 2. This is easily one of the strangest direction changes Pixar has ever made. The first Cars movie was a slow, nostalgic story about learning to slow down and appreciate life. It had this cozy American atmosphere with small towns, Route 66, and a message about reconnecting with what really matters. And then Cars 2 suddenly turns the franchise into a spy movie. Instead of focusing on Lightning McQueen and racing, the movie shifts the spotlight almost entirely onto Mater. Now, Mater is okay as a supporting character, but building an entire movie around him doesn't really work that well. The result is a story that feels completely disconnected from what the first movie is about. Suddenly we have international espionage, conspiracy plots, torture devices, and even guns in what is a G-rated Pixar movie. So tonally, it's all over the place. You have goofy slapstick comedy happening right next to scenes where characters are literally being crushed or executed. The story is surprisingly complicated for a kids' movie. There are double agents, secret identities, and a twist villain that feels like it's from a completely different film. The whole thing just feels like doesn't feel like a story Pixar are passionate about. It feels more like a movie that was designed to sell toys. When a Pixar movie starts feeling like a toy commercial, that's not a good sign. Number 28, A Bug's Life. This was Pixar's second movie, and coming right after Toy Story, it feels like a bit of a step down. Now, to be clear, it isn't a totally bad movie, but compared to what Pixar would go on to accomplish later, it feels surprisingly simple. The story is just the three amigos with bugs. A misunderstood hero recruits performers he thinks are warriors, and together they end up standing to an oppressive villain. It's a very familiar story template. The characters also aren't quite as memorable compared to Pixar's later films, maybe with the exception of Heimlich. Flick is a decent protagonist, but he doesn't really have the same personality or emotional depth that characters like Woody or Buzz have. That said, Hopper is a pretty intimidating villain. His speech about how ants outnumber the grasshoppers is still one of the more memorable villain moments in the early Pixar movies. Circus bugs also have some fun, chaotic energy to the movie, and at the time, the animation was actually groundbreaking, even though it doesn't really hold up today. But compared to Pixar's later storytelling, this one feels like the studio was still figuring things out, which is fine, because like I said, it was only their second movie. You're allowed an early miss, and it's an important step in Pixar's history, but it's not one of their most memorable movies. Number 27, The Good Dinosaur. This is a movie that's almost impossible to talk about without mentioning its troubled production. The film went through years of rewrites, delays, and even a complete change of director halfway through development, and unfortunately you can kind of feel that in the final product, which is a shame because the original concept was fascinating. The idea was simple but really interesting. What if the asteroid never hit Earth and dinosaurs never went extinct? That's a fantastic starting point for the story. It was going to be humans interacting with dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs were going to be farm equipment. Like, there's a few of those elements in the final movie, but it's going to be more human-focused as well. But after all the production issues, the final film ended up becoming something much simpler. What we got instead is basically Lion King mixed with Ice Age. A young character loses a parent, gets separated from home, and goes on a journey of self-discovery. It's a very familiar story. Where the movie absolutely excels, though, is the visuals. The environments in the film are stunning. The rivers, mountains, and landscapes look incredibly photorealistic, but the characters themselves are extremely cartoony, which creates a strange visual contrast. And when the story itself is this generic, the film ends up feeling like style over substance. Number 26, Cars. It's fine. It's always been one of Pixar's most puzzling ideas, because the big question I end up asking is, why are they cars? In movies like Zootopia, for example, the animal world is used to explore social themes. In Ratatouille, the idea of a rat becoming a chef directly ties into the movie's message about creativity. But in Cars, the characters being cars doesn't really affect the story. You could replace every character with humans, keep almost every single line and plot line, and almost nothing would change. At its core, it's basically a sports movie about an arrogant celebrity athlete who learns humility after getting straight into a small town. Now, to be fair, the Route 66 setting does give the film a lot of charm. Radiator Springs is a genuinely cozy environment, and the theme about slowing down and appreciating life is solid. But emotionally, the movie never quite reaches the depth Pixar is known for. It's pleasant, it's likable, but compared to Pixar's best work, it feels more like a comfortable road trip than a powerful story. Number 25, Wall-E. This placement will probably surprise a lot of people, because the opening in the movie is pretty good. The first half of the film is one of the most creative stretches Pixar has ever produced. There's almost no dialogue, and the story is told entirely through visuals, music, and atmosphere. Watch this little robot going through his daily routine on an abandoned Earth, collecting junk, watching old musicals, is slowly starting to develop curiosity about the world around him. It's charming, quite incredibly cinematic. But once the movie shifts to the spaceship, the movie changes a lot, because suddenly the storytelling becomes more direct. Instead of subtle visual storytelling, the movie starts spelling out its themes about consumerism, environmental neglect, and screen-obsessed humans. Those ideas are interesting, but the delivery becomes much heavier. Instead of letting the audience piece things together naturally, the movie starts explaining its message out loud. The film is still good overall. It has a really cute love story between Wally and Eve, but the second half never quite matches the elegance of the first half. The opening act would probably be a pretty good short film on its own, though. Number 24, Brave. At the beginning, the movie seems like it's going to be this classic fantasy adventure. The setting in medieval Scotland is beautiful, the music is amazing, and the Scottish mythology gives the movie a unique atmosphere compared to other Pixar films. Merida is also a refreshing protagonist. She's stubborn, independent, and determined to make her own choices to follow tradition, back before this was considered super cliche. The early conflict between Merida and her mother about expectations and responsibilities is a pretty interesting setup. But halfway through the movie, the story takes a strange turn. Instead of continuing to explore that conflict, the plot suddenly shifts to a transformation story where Merida's mother turns into a bear. So it basically just turns into Brother Bear, or should I say, Mother Bear. The mother-daughter relationship is still heartfelt, and there are some emotional moments, but the story is, for the most part, pretty predictable, and for a Pixar movie, it's not all that funny. There are a few comedic moments with the Triplet brothers and the clan leaders, but its humor never really stands out. It's a decent movie, but compared to Pixar's bigger films, it feels a little more middle of the road. Speaking of middle of the road, a road trip movie, Onward. This movie has one of the most creative premises Pixar has come up with in years. The idea is this world used to be full of magic, but over time magic is replaced with modern technology. So I have elves living in suburban neighborhoods, centaurs working as police officers, and mythical creatures doing their world everyday jobs. It's a really fun concept. But instead of exploring the world more deeply, the movie just settles into this fairly standard road trip story. Emotionally, the idea works, because it's two brothers trying to complete a magical spell so they can spend one last day with their father, and the relationship between the two brothers is pretty heartfelt. Chris Pratt and Tom Holland also do a great job bringing energy to the characters, but the world itself feels kind of underdeveloped, and a lot of the fantasy and modern life jokes just feel like movies like Shrek have already explored, and the ending is genuinely touching, but the journey getting there feels a little rough. Number 22, Luca. The Italian setting is beautiful, the animation has this warm watercolor-like style that gives the movie a very relaxed atmosphere, the character designs are completely unique compared to a lot of Pixar's other films. It's a movie about friendship, identity, and excitement discovering the world for the first time, but the stakes are pretty small compared to a lot of Pixar movies. The main conflict in the movie is winning a bicycle race. That's it. That's the big conflict. So, it makes the film feel less ambitious compared to Pixar's emotional storytelling. It can be charming, but it's also very, very safe. Number 21, Lightyear. The major problem from the start is the premise doesn't make a lot of sense. Canonically, this is supposed to be a movie in the Toy Story universe that made Andy want a Buzz Lightyear toy, but the actual movie we get is this fairly serious science fiction story about time dilation, space colonization, and regret. It's a very strange tonal mismatch. So if Andy saw this movie and he was a kid and wanted the Buzz Lightyear toy, that means that this movie came out in 1995 or earlier. This doesn't feel like a movie that came out in 1995 or earlier. It feels like a movie that came out in 2022. So it feels like Interstellar for kids, and also making uh, Zurg Buzz's dad didn't, or making Zurg future Buzz didn't make a lot of sense. Because in Toy Story 2, he says, I am your father. And yeah, that's a reference to Empire Strikes Back. But remember, before the toys realize they're toys, they have that character's backstory programmed into them. That means the people who wrote Zurg and programmed the Zurg toy mean that Zurg is his dad. So that wasn't just an Empire Strikes Back reference. It actually, in canonically, Zurg is Buzz's dad. And I was like, no, he's future Buzz. Like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. The only memorable character is Socks the cat. I don't know why they didn't just make a movie out of the Buzz Lightyear of Star Command show, because those characters are actually pretty memorable. This just feels like they had a plot outline, and they kind of worked with what they had with the plot outline instead of fleshing out the script like they should have. Number 20, Elemental. This movie actually can be visually creative. The entire world is built around people made of fire, water, air, and earth. Avatar and Last Airbender, but visually the movie is pretty good though. Watching fire characters interact with water characters, or seeing how the city infrastructure is had to handle different elements is pretty impressive and creative, and the animation is incredibly detailed. But the story is pretty weak. It doesn't really work for me. I think that the romance aspect was a little overdone. I think maybe it would have been better had it been at the end the twist being, oh, well, we don't work compatibly as a couple because I'm fire and you're water, but we can still be friends. That would have subverted expectations in a way that a lot of the best Pixar films do. The best Pixar films kind of subvert your expectations and go in a direction you didn't think it was going to go. But it's a very safe, predictable romance story instead of doing something completely different that would have been a little bit unpredictable. Number 19, Finding Dory. It's enjoyable when you're watching it, but it's also pretty forgettable, which is fitting considering it's about a character who fits everything. So, Dory, she works well on her own character. I mean, she certainly works better than Mater does in Cars 2. There are some good elements with the octopus and the whale, but it's basically the same thing we saw in Finding Nemo. The Marine Institute setting does add some new environments and fun sequences, and the truck driving scene with the otters is pretty cute, but emotionally it's not as strong as the first film. It's just kind of okay. Number 18, Hoppers. For a kids movie, it's pretty solid. For a Pixar movie, it's okay. One of the biggest issues is the human animation. Pixar has made great looking human characters before, such as Incredibles or Inside Out, but the humans here have that dumb bean mouth design style that just looks terrible. It gives the characters a slightly unsettling look compared to Pixar's usual designs, and the premise could work. A human brain gets placed inside a robotic beaver. That's exactly the kind of weird idea Pixar's turned into classics before, like Ratatouille, but the movie never really fully commits to exploring the concept. The soundtrack also relies heavily on generic pop songs, which feels very out of place for Pixar. Like, that would work in a DreamWorks movie, but not here. And the environmental message is very familiar. It's a theme we've seen in many other movies before. And the third act becomes basically a horror movie for kids, where the animals become plotting revenge on the humans. And some of the moments just feel like they belong in a different genre entirely. There's some charm, but overall the movie feels like more of a product rather than a passion project. Number 17, Cars 3. It's not a very high bar, but this is the best movie in the Cars trilogy. Again, not a high bar, but there you go. After the strange direction of Cars 2, this movie feels like Pixar trying to course correct, no pun intended. Instead of another gimmick-heavy plot, the story returns to the themes of mentorship and legacy. Lightning McQueen is getting older, and a new generation of high-tech racers is starting to replace him. That idea mirrors the story of Doc Hudson from the first movie, and that parallel gives the film some real emotional weight. The movie also introduces Cruz Ramirez, who starts as McQueen's trainer. Over time, she becomes one of the most important characters in the story. Her arc about rediscovering her dream she had lost actually works really well. The racing scenes also look fantastic. Pixar clearly learned a lot about animating speed and motion over the years. However, the third act does feel a little rushed. Like, you've seen the movie. The movie's almost 10 years old at this point. I don't care about giving out spoilers. McQueen has to, Cruz takes over for him at the end of the race. And just because she has the same numbers, so because he gives her the number 95, she was like, that's not how it works. They can't just switch racers halfway through in the last lap. That's not how it works. It feels kind of short to just give her like this victory lap. But I don't know. The ending is pretty satisfying overall, though, and it is a good tribute to Paul Newman. But that's kind of what it feels like. It just feels more like a movie as a tribute to Paul Newman rather than like a genuine good story. Number 16, Monsters University. This is a pretty fun movie. It's got a lot of entertaining new characters, but does this really need to exist? Because the original Monsters Inc. already gave us a complete story, so going back to show how I can still be met feels a little unnecessary. And so, but I do enjoy where the ending goes, though, because Mike learns he can't become a scare. That's a surprisingly honest lesson. The movie becomes about accepting your limitations and finding a different path forward. It doesn't expand the universe that much, but it's still pretty enjoyable. Number 15, Incredibles 2. We waited 14 years for this. It's just okay. And the biggest problem is that they made Elastigirl the main character instead of expanding on the ideas of a superhero family. Instead of seeing the superheroes fight crime as a family, which is what the first film set up, no, we're going to make this an Elastigirl spin-off movie. If it had been called Elastigirl, I would have not have had a bigger problem with it. But because it's called Incredibles 2, you expect it to team up. It'd be like if you saw an Avengers movie and it only focused on one main character. So that would be kind of weird, right? So also the villain, not as memorable as Syndrome from the first movie. It's hard to feel like this could have been something better. Number 14, Toy Story, the movie that started it all for Pixar. When it was released in 1995, it completely changed animation forever. It was the first fully computer animated feature film, and it proved that CGI animation could tell emotional stories, not just act as a visual gimmick. So the animation to some degree looks a little dated, but storytelling is still pretty well, simply because it's very simple. Woody and Buzz have one of the best character dynamics Pixar's ever created. Watching the rivalry slowly turn to friendship is both funny and heartfelt. The humor is sharp, the pacing is tight, and the movie perfectly captures the imagination of childhood. It's not Pixar's most emotionally complex film, but it laid the foundation for everything the studio would go on to accomplish. Number 13, Inside Out. The sequel had a lot of pressure behind it because the first movie is so beloved, and I think Pixar did a really good job. The movie introduces new emotions like anxiety, envy, embarrassment, and ennui. Anxiety, in particular, is a very interesting character. She isn't necessarily the villain, she's just trying to help Riley succeed. She just has bad methods of doing that. The idea captures the teenage experience really well. The animation inside Riley's mind also gets even more creative. There's a hilarious preschool parody of shows that looks like Bluey. So while it may not be as groundbreaking as the first film, it's still a worthy sequel. Number 12, Elio. This movie had a very turbulent development behind the scenes. There were delays after delays after delays, director changes, and a lot of uncertainty about what the final movie would be. But the finished film ended up being a charming and magic space adventure. The story follows a lonely kid who's accidentally mistaken for its ambassador to an alien council, and that premise gives Pixar a lot of room for creativity. The alien worlds and creatures are incredibly imaginative. Visually, the movie is one of Pixar's most colorful sci-fi settings, and the emotional core of the story works really well. Now, the villain is kind of weak, and some parts of the story feel familiar, but the movie has a lot of heart, and that's kind of what elevates it a little bit higher. Number 11, Toy Story 4. Now, Pixar first announced this movie, a lot of people, myself included, were skeptical because Toy Story 3 already felt like a perfect ending. But it works for what it is, because instead of focusing on Andy, the story becomes a personal journey for Woody. The introduction of Forky is both hilarious and surprisingly meaningful. A character who literally thinks he's trash becomes a clever metaphor for finding purpose. And Woody's arc about finding his place in the world after Andy grows up is also very compelling. The movie feels more like an epilogue rather than a necessary sequel, but it's a thoughtful and satisfying one that still has a lot of emotion to it, especially near the end where Woody reunites with Bo Peep. And coming at number 10, Toy Story 3. This movie might be Pixar's most emotionally intense film. The story picks up years after the second movie, with Andy now preparing to leave for college, and the toys are suddenly faced with the possibility that their time with Andy is coming to an end. That setup also gives the movie a lot of emotional weight. The film also introduces Sunnyside Daycare, which at first seems like the perfect place for toys, but it quickly turns into something that's basically a toy prison. And lots of the bear works really well as a villain. He seems friendly at first, but the more you learn about him, the darker the story becomes. In fact, I think he's probably the greatest villain in all the Toy Story movies just because of how manipulative he was. And then there's the incinerator scene. Even though you know logically the toys aren't going to die, the way the scene is framed with the toys holding hands accepting their fate is still really emotional. And the movie delivers one of the most emotional endings Pixar ever made. And giving the toys to Bonnie feels like a perfect way to close the trilogy by passing of the torch. Number 9, Toy Story 2. This is one of the rare sequels that many people think might actually be better than the original. The movie expands Woody's story in a really interesting way. Instead of just focusing on Andy, the film explores Woody's past and introduces Jesse, Bullseye, and Stinky Pete. Jesse's backstory is one of the most emotional moments Pixar's ever created. It's an entirely heartbreaking story in just a few minutes. It's a reminder of something that all toys eventually face, the possibility of being forgotten. The movie also raises a very interesting question for Woody. Is it better to live forever in a museum where you'll always be admired, or risk being left by a kid knowing that one day they'll grow up? That theme gives the story a surprising amount of depth. On top of that, the movie is still packed with humor, action, and great character moments. And considering this movie was literally almost erased because somebody at Pixar screwed up, and the only reason this movie exists and was able to release on time is because one of the employees was on maternity leave and had a copy of the movie with her when she was at home. That's kind of hilarious. So the fact that this actually exists is actually a little bit of a miracle, which also is pretty interesting. Number 8, Finding Nemo. This is one of Pixar's most perfectly structured adventure movies. The opening alone is one of Pixar's most shocking and emotional moments. The story follows Marlin, an overly protective father who crosses the entire ocean trying to rescue his son. And at the same time, Nemo is on his own journey learning to become independent. Those two parallel stories work really well together. The underwater world Pixar created is also incredible. From the coral reefs to the deep ocean trenches, the environments feel vibrant and alive. The movie is also filled with tons of memorable characters. Dory, Crush, the sharks, the tank gang, they all bring something unique and memorable to the story. But the real emotional core of the film is Marlin learning to let go. He has to accept that protecting Nemo doesn't mean controlling every part of his life. That message resonates with both the kids and the parents, but more so the parents. Number 7, Inside Out. One of the most creative ideas Pixar has ever come up with. The entire story takes place inside the mind of a young girl named Riley. Her emotions literally control how she experiences the world. And what makes the movie so powerful is how it explains complicated emotions in a way that both the kids and the adults can understand. Joy spends most of the movie trying to keep sadness from influencing Riley, but eventually she realizes that sadness actually has an important role. The moment when Joy understands the value of sadness is one of the most profound emotional revelations Pixar has ever written. The movie manages to be funny, imaginative, and deeply thoughtful at the same time. Number 6, Ratatouille. On paper, this movie sounds ridiculous. A rat who wants to become a chef in Paris. But Pixar somehow turns that idea into one of the most inspiring and memorable stories they've ever told, and the film captures the atmosphere of Paris beautifully. The kitchens, restaurants, and city streets all feel incredibly detailed and alive. But the real strength of the movie is its theme. The idea that anyone can cook isn't just about cooking. It's about creativity, passion, and believing that talent can come from unexpected places. And then there's Anton Ygot's final speech. His monologue about critics and creativity is one of the most powerful pieces of writing Pixar has ever produced. As a critic myself, it resonates with me perfectly. That speech alone elevates the entire movie. Number 5, Monsters, Inc. This is one of the first Pixar movies that truly felt like the studio had mastered world building. The idea of a monster society powered by children screams incredibly creative, if not a little bit scary. Every part of the monster world feels carefully designed. But what really makes the movie work is the relationship between Sully and Boo. At first, Boo is just this problem that Sully has to solve, but over time, their relationship becomes the emotional heart of the film. Watching Sully slowly grow attached to her transforms the story into something much more heartfelt. And that ending, where Sully hears Boo say kitty again, is pure Pixar magic. Number 4, Up. The opening montage of this movie is one of the most emotional sequences in animation history. In just a few minutes, Pixar tells the entire life story of Carl and Ellie. This is where this is a better love story than Twilight meme came from, because the original joke was, Pixar told a better love story in 10 minutes with Up than Twilight did in 4 books and movies. So now whenever there's something like that, they always go, oh, well, this is still a better love story than Twilight. That was the original meme that this came from. Their dreams, their struggles, and for each other lost the cross to live with. And it's one of the most powerful openings any movie has ever had. But the rest of the movie deserves credit too. Carl's adventure with Russell becomes a story about rediscovering purpose after loss. Russell's optimism proves the perfect contrast to Carl's bitterness. Together they form one of Pixar's most unexpected but heartfelt partnerships. The movie ultimately becomes a story about grief, healing, and learning that life can still surprise you. Number 3, Coco. This is easily one of Pixar's most visually stunning movies. The Land of the Dead is filled with color, music, and incredibly creative designs. Every part of that world feels vibrant and alive. But the real emotional core is about family and memory. Miguel's journey begins as a story about following his dream of becoming a musician, but it suddenly becomes a story about understanding where he come from. The final scene where Miguel sings Remember Me to his great-grandmother is one of the most powerful endings Pixar's ever created. It's a moment that hits incredibly hard emotionally, and not to mention that Ernesto de la Cruz is probably the most evil villain in Pixar history. Number 2, The Incredibles. This might be Pixar's most mature film. It's not just a superhero movie. It's a story about identity, purpose, and family. Bob Parr struggles with feeling trapped in ordinary life after once being a hero. Helen tries to keep the family together while navigating those challenges, and the kids are learning who they are and what they're capable of. The movie balances action, humor, and emotional storytelling incredibly well. And even today, the action scenes still hold up better than many modern superhero movies. Brad Bird basically made a perfect superhero movie years before the MCU existed. And in first place is Soul. For me, this is Pixar's greatest achievement. The movie asks the question that a lot of people struggle with at some point in their lives. What is my purpose? Why am I here? But instead of giving a simple answer, the movie explores the idea that life's meaning isn't tied to one big destiny. Sometimes the purpose of life is simply living it. The world of the great before is beautifully designed, and the music is beautiful and incredible. There's even a moment where the movie almost loses me, where Joe ends up in the cat's body, but that moment actually becomes one of the most important parts of the story. Joe begins to notice all the small things he took for granted. That realization is powerful. It's funny, emotional, and visually breathtaking, and for me, Soul stands as Pixar's greatest achievement, and it comes in at number one. Go ahead and share your ranking of the Pixar movies, and I'll see you next time.